We've talked a lot about the need to repair units at Toronto Community Housing, and I'll have something to say about that just as I conclude my own remarks. We've talked about short-term rentals and the impact they can have on neighbours and on neighbourhoods. And at next week's Executive Committee, there are actually 3 items that relate to housing, and I want to address each of those today because they're being made public today before the consideration by the Executive Committee, those 3 being short-term rentals, secondly, the possibility of a vacant home tax, and thirdly, the future of Toronto Community Housing. I understand the growing importance of short-term rentals in the City of Toronto, and that's for a number of different groups, those who are renting, those who rent, obviously various industries affected by some of this change. The sharing economy and companies like Airbnb have great economic potential for our city and great benefits for residents and visitors to the city. But the potential impacts of short-term rentals on our neighbourhoods, on our housing affordability, on existing industries, and on availability of housing must be carefully considered. What we don't need is the withdrawal of much-needed housing from permanent residents who need it, or neighbourhoods to be disrupted by the comings and goings, sometimes daily, of different renters, often in multiple homes in neighbourhoods or in condo buildings. The staff report that Executive Committee will consider recommends regulations for the industry intended to protect neighbourhoods, push more rental units back onto the market, and level the playing field for hotels and short-term rental providers. I'm pleased to see that our staff, our capable city staff, have prepared draft regulations and are ready to ask the public directly now for feedback on these regulations so that we can deal with this issue. And that's the thing. We have to deal with these emerging technology issues as they change the way we do business and change the way we live our lives. We have to rise to address the future and embrace it. As I have said before, I am determined to see Toronto as a place where we respect stability and established businesses, but at the same time, we don't try to turn back the hands of time and try to pretend that new technologies and new ways of doing things don't exist. That is just not realistic. I happen to come out for a very busy executive meeting and council meeting, and or anything else that's on your mind today.
Just for the Airbnb, did you actually have recommendations, or are you holding off on announcing them?
No, there are recommendations in the report that talk about restricting people's ability to rent properties on a short-term basis, short-term being defined as 28 days or less, to principal residences, so you'll get around or away from this real problem that's existed where people buy up, say, a number of houses or condos and operate them in effect either as kind of a quasi-hotel or operate them as kind of a transient accommodation where people are coming and going and really disrupting neighbourhoods. And so there are very specific recommendations in the report, which is out this morning, and hopefully you can take a look. And I should point out, the recommendations that are coming out this morning are recommendations for public consultation now, because we want to make sure that in the spotlight of the public, people can say what they have to say, both stakeholders and members of the public. But the idea is to start to regulate and to register and to license people who are in this business in a way that can provide for a new way to accommodate people, but at the same time start to limit the disruption of neighbourhoods and make sure that that it's done in an orderly fashion.
Mayor, one of the recommendations is that you would prohibit the rentals in places that were not principal residences, and your report says that would reduce by about 3,200 the number of units available. What consequence do you think that's going to have in a city like this for tourism, for people coming? 3,200 units is a lot of units. Do you think it would not have an adverse?
Well, I think if you look at the glass as half full instead of half empty, as I always try to do, you will still have, I think, about 9,000 units that are available. But I think it will also address the fact that in many cases where people have chosen to buy up some of these units that are not their principal residence and rent them out indefinitely on a short-term basis, a few days at a time, what you find is this is extremely disruptive to neighbourhoods, and it is taking housing off the market that might otherwise be available for long-term permanent renters, as it were, and that's a problem for us. And so I think what we've done here, as we've tried to do with everything, is achieve a balance between this kind of availability for tourists and others and the needs of people for permanent housing and the need for stable neighborhoods. And so I think, but it's out for discussion now, and we'll see what people say.
One supplementary, how much of this is about the hotel industry saying we want to protect our turf to be able to charge what we charge versus Airbnb charging a discounted rent to consumers?
Well, the hotel industry have a legitimate concern here because they're paying commercial rates of taxation and so on, whereas sometimes in the same building, there are groups of condos where they're sort of renting those out on a short-term basis competitive with hotels and not paying the same taxes. So part of what we propose to do here is to level that playing field in terms of at least saying that there are some regulations around those who are participating in organizations like Airbnb, and at the same time that they will be charged a tax. And I think it is fair that when you allow for the introduction of this new technology, that you also make sure it's done on terms that are fair to established industries, but not try to turn back the hands of time. And that's what we've tried to achieve, this balance, and now it's out for public comment.